Hey guys, today's video is going to be super simple. I'm just going to show you guys my Fujifilm X-Pro2 camera settings for the photos that I took during my Chinatown photo walk POV video. A lot of you guys asked me like what kind of recipes or what kind of camera settings I was on with my X-Pro2. I'm going to show you how I got the photos with the JPEG straight out of the camera. Just to be clear, I did not use any recipes actually. I was just playing around with some of the settings on the camera, and I know Fuji X Weekly has a lot of great recipes, so definitely go check it out if you have a chance, but I did not use any recipes. Maybe it will look somewhat similar to some of the recipes, but this is my settings. So what happened was I was using Classic Chrome as my film simulation. So I have Classic Chrome set up. The reason why I have that is because I like that contrasty and muted kind of color tone on the pictures when I am doing street photos. If I'm doing portrait, usually I don't use Classic Chrome. I'll use probably something like Provia, which is a standard. This one right here, or even Astia. But Classic Chrome, I usually use it for street photos because of the contrast. So film simulation, I was on Classic Chrome, and let's go into the menu and take a look here. For the image size, I always take photos with 16:9. That's the aspect ratio. I don't do 3:2, I believe. Yes, 3:2. I only use 3:2 if I'm using the camera in a portrait kind of orientation, because 16:9, if you do it in a portrait orientation, it will be too narrow. But I usually take photos with 16:9 if I'm on the street. I will also show you guys how I get the Hasselblad X-Pen kind of aspect ratio. It's not in camera. Don't even think about it. It doesn't have that aspect ratio. Some people ask how did you get it? I got it by editing the photo or cropping the photos in post on the computer. So you can get that aspect ratio straight out of the camera. But I use 16:9 because I like that narrow or shorter aspect ratio to take photos. It looks more like a movie. I am a videographer mainly, so I always enjoy having a shorter kind of aspect ratio. So aspect ratio 16:9. I take fine and raw photo just in case if I need to edit the photos in post, but I always try to get the look in camera, no matter if I'm doing photos or videos, because I don't want to spend too much time editing the photos and videos in post, like playing around with the colors. And also, if you get the look in camera, it's much easier to edit in post as well, because you pretty much have the colors ready in JPEGs or in a video. So if you have done videography jobs, you know that you want to get the look in camera as much as possible. And another thing is, if you're with, let's say, your friends and clients, you want to show them the picture quality or the actual image that you want to create, and you don't want to show them a raw photo with nothing accurate until you process them in post. Then that way it will be a long wait for them to get to know how it's going to look like, and they can't really imagine it, I assume, because they don't have your presets and they don't have your LUTs and everything. So I always try to get the look in camera so I can show my friends and clients how the image is going to look like approximately, so they can feel happier and also they can see what's going to happen. So I don't usually rely on editing the photos and videos in RAW. And then I'm taking uncompressed RAW photos wise. I'm going to super quickly go through the settings. Grain, I use weak because I can add grain in post if I think that is too much. But another cool thing about Fujifilm camera is, I showed it in my previous video, I think it was a year ago, that you can actually edit the raw photos in post. So you can add in more grain or less grain. You can change all these settings in post within the camera, so you don't have to worry too much, as long as you have raw here as the image quality. And dynamic range, I leave it at auto. I don't want to fiddle with that. White balance, this is what happens. So in order to get that kind of tone in the photos, just like how I did with my Chinatown photo walk, is I adjust the white balance. I'm so sorry if the audio is kind of like weird. I have some background noise happening right now. I think someone is singing karaoke, like they're so loud. Anyway, so white balance is what I have. I leave it to auto if I'm doing street photos because I don't want to fiddle with the white balance. I would just let the camera to decide if something is balanced in terms of the pure white. And I think Fujifilm cameras are really good with white balance. That's why the Fujifilm colors are really nice compared to other brand name. Let's say if I'm using a Sony camera, it's always like kind of yellow and greenish. I know they're getting better, but still, compared to Fujifilm, I think the white balance makes a huge difference. So I leave it in auto. If I'm doing portrait for like, let's say a job, then I will set a custom white balance so it doesn't shift during the day. If the sun is like in and out, you'll have like a weird white balance shift, even with between like photos, between each photo, I should say. So within here, this is my key settings. This is something that I would highly recommend you guys to try, is to use the white balance shift. For street photos, you can leave it in auto, just like how I do it. White balance shift, I have red set to -7, so it's like -7 to the left. And then I have blue set to -4. So what that means is the photos are going to be a little bit green and yellow. The opposite of red is green. The opposite of blue is yellow. So it's like green and yellow. This is the settings, or the main setting that I used to create that kind of film movie-like kind of colors in my photo for the street photography. This is my favorite like white balance shift. -7 red and then -4 blue. So if you want to create similar photos, try to use this and try to use auto white balance for the main like color temperature. I don't custom white balance if it's for street photos. So this is what happened. I highly recommend you guys to play around with this. Go to different spots of the grid and pick your favorite. Because for portrait photos, I usually will go like a lot warmer. I'll do maybe like a red 4 and then -2 blue. That's for portraits because I want a healthier skin tone. But for street photos, I do -7 red and -4 blue. So this is the main thing. I did not use any recipes. This is the recipe. And after white balance, I did not touch on any highlight tone or shadow tone because I don't want to increase any more contrast. Classic Chrome is really contrasty already. If I can show you some samples, so I don't want to play around with this, and I don't want to lift the shadows or like tone down the highlights because that's gonna kind of ruin the Classic Chrome look. So I don't touch that. Color, I leave it at 0. It doesn't really matter. It's not super important to me in terms of how much color because it's already muted in Classic Chrome. Sharpness, I put in +1. The reason is because I post a lot of photos directly in JPEG format. So I want to increase the sharpness. So when, let's say, social media like Instagram, when they compress the photo, it's still going to be a little bit sharper than like the regular compressed photos. So that's why I added +1. I usually add sharpness in post anyway if I'm editing a photo because I'm using the Fujifilm 35mm f1.4 lens. That is not the sharpest lens. That's the main character of this lens. It's a little bit softer. That's why it has that magic look with this lens. So I'm adding +1 sharpness. By the way, the 35mm f1.4 lens is my favorite street photography lens, or even portrait. I've taken some really nice portrait using that lens, so I love this lens. The autofocus is okay on that lens. It's not as bad as people say. It's not like lightning fast, but then it's still acceptable. Noise reduction, as usual, -4 all the way down. I don't want the camera to do any noise reduction unless I really need noise reduction. I can do it in post, like if that's the case. Long exposure and not off, definitely. So lens modulation optimizer, I don't even know what that is, but I always leave it on. Color space, sRGB. Yeah, so that's my major setting for the street photography look that I always use when I'm taking street photos, especially the Chinatown POV video that I posted about like a couple of weeks ago. That's how I get the look. And let's talk about something else. I also use aperture priority mode on the camera. So what happened is I will set the lens aperture ring to whatever f-stop I want, and then I'll leave shutter speed and ISO in auto mode. That way the camera will decide the proper shutter speed and ISO for me. I have a limiter set up so it doesn't go all the way like to the max. I have ISO set to 200 to 6,400. 6,400 is a little bit of a push for this camera, but it's okay because Fujifilm film grain, like the noise, I should say, the noise when you're using high ISO is actually not bad. It looks more like film grain. So 6,400 ISO, it's okay if I really need it. But because I'm using an f1.4 lens, it's not that bad. I don't usually go up to 6,400 anyway. But minimum shutter speed, because the X-Pro2 does not have IBIS, the lens does not have stabilization, so I will need a little bit higher shutter speed, especially when I'm doing one-hand kind of photo taking. That way I have a sharper image without motion blur. So 1/250th of a second, that's the shutter speed. And with this aperture priority setting, I have the front dial. You can I hope you can see it, kind of see that I have the front dial set up so that I use the front dial to control my exposure compensation right there. So you can see that I am going from -1 to -2. On a sunny day, I definitely will set it to -1 at least for exposure compensation, so I'm not blowing out like any highlights. And for like a cloudy day or like a darker scene, I'll leave it at like 0. That's pretty much it. And as I said before, the reason why I want a more accurate exposure is because I don't want to fiddle with post-production to edit the photo in post. That's why I'm doing it in camera. So that's my main exposure kind of setup. And when it comes to autofocus or focus, I use autofocus. I don't do manual focus, especially when I'm doing like street photography. I usually would do it with one hand, like just grabbing onto the camera like that. And sometimes I have to hold onto an umbrella because it's raining. So I'll leave it in autofocus, and I will be using single autofocus, no continuous. I don't trust, not that I don't, yeah, kind of. I don't really, not that I don't trust it, but then it's kind of slow when it comes to continuous autofocus with the X-Pro2 and an older lens, the 35-1 f1.4. So I'll leave it at single autofocus with single point autofocus. So I have the list box there. I can move it around with my joystick to wherever point I want, or I can just point, half press the shutter and then lock in the focus, and then I can recompose. So this is the easiest way for me. Even for portrait photography, I will use single point most of the time, even when there is eye autofocus available on the X-Pro2. It's actually not that accurate when it comes to eye autofocus, and then I think the zone is really small. So anyway, I use single point autofocus. And what else should I say? Well, actually, I think I mentioned everything. I captured JPEG and RAW. And one more thing I want to mention before I end the video. Again, this video is super quick, super not script. This white balance setting and also using classic chrome is also how I capture the video with the X-Pro2. So as I said in my previous video, saying that the X-Pro2 is really good with taking photos and videos, I'm not even kidding. You can actually use the same film simulation, same white balance shift to create that look you want in camera for video. So you have a consistent look between your photos and your video if you want to do that. So this is exactly what I am using for video as well. If you want to take street video with the X-Pro2. So it has that little greenish, yellowish kind of tone, like a movie kind of film tone in the shadows. That's how I get it on the X-Pro2. So those are the settings, -7, -4 on that one. No, I think that's pretty much all I use, or all I adjust on the X-Pro2. Super simple. Even when I was using my XE2, I have similar settings. I don't want to fiddle with the settings when I'm on the street taking photos. I just want the camera to do most of the lifting. I just want to make sure that I set the color tone the way I want during that day. Of course, as I said, if it's like a gloomy day or a sunny day, you might want to shift the white balance shift a little bit just for your liking. But I really think not enough people talk about the white balance shift function on like on any camera actually. Even on my Sony, I have this grid set up to a little bit more magenta, a little bit warmer, so it doesn't look like that green yellow tint kind of look on my Sony camera. And it helps a lot because the more you get the look in camera, the less you have to do in post, because these cameras, like especially for videos, they don't shoot raw, and only my Blackmagic camera can have raw that you can adjust the white balance after. So you really want to dial in the colors in the camera before you start taking photos or videos. That way will help you to save a lot of time in post. And that's it. This is my settings on my X-Pro2 for street photography. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or suggestions or your own recipes that you want to share underneath this video in the description, not description, but the comment section below, I would really appreciate it. If you have any suggestion for like any kind of settings that you want to share with the group, let us know in the comment section below as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.